Hi there, my name's Lucy Parkin and I organise the Abergavenny Writing Festival, which we're really pleased now to be able to take online. We've got Tim Lebbon here today, I'm going to be interviewing. Tim Lebbon is a New York Times-bestselling writer. Tim has had over 40 novels published to date, as well as hundreds of novellas and short stories. The movie of his book, The Silence, debuted on Netflix in 2019, and Pay the Ghost, starring Nicolas Cage, was released for Halloween 2015. So if we can start with the first question, Tim. How long have you been living in this part of the world?
I moved to South Wales. I've been living in South Wales for almost 40 years now. In fact, yeah, about 40 years, which has given away my age really quickly. But my wife and I, 22 years ago, moved from Newport to Goitre, and regard it as a really good move. It's one of the best things we ever did, I think.
And what do you like most about living in the area?
Oh, the countryside. I'm a big, as I said, I lived in Newport for a while beforehand, but I'm certainly not a city boy, I was brought up in the country in Devon, and living in the country now is just wonderful. I love the area. I love running, trail running, biking, wild swimming. So I'm in a perfect part of the world, really. There's an Abergavenny being surrounded by 3 great mountains. I love running in the mountains. And we do a lot of hill walking with the kids, and we've got a dog who's old and decrepit now, but he used to come for long walks with us in the countryside. One of my highlights of lockdown was a walk I did with my daughter. We went along the Wye Valley, the Usk Valley walk, and it was early in the morning, and we'd already seen a buzzard. We were sitting by the river, we saw an otter, we saw kingfisher, and then walking home, I was recounting all this to Ellie. I said, we've seen otter, kingfisher, and a fox. And at that moment, a fox walked out in front of us. And there's not many parts of the world where you'll see that happen. So that's nature's my big love.
And looking back, how and when would you say your passion for writing began? How old were you when you started to feel as though this was something that you wanted to do?
Single figures, really. I loved writing from a kid. From when I could pick up a pencil, I was writing stories. My mum instilled a real love of reading in me. And back in my primary school days, I was reading a book a day, I guess. I got quite involved with Pilgrimley Library down in Newport, and my friend Amadin and I would go and help the lady restock books on the shelves, and had a real passion for fiction and storytelling. And I started storytelling in my youth, really. And all through my teens, I started and didn't finish many novels. I wish I knew where they were. Part of me wishes I knew where they were. Part of me thinks it's probably a good job I don't, to be honest. But yeah, from a very early age. But I remember the short story I wrote when I was probably 20, called Black Heart, my first short horror story, actually, my first horror story. And it's from when I wrote that story that I thought to myself, I'd like to pursue this, and maybe not quite then think about doing it for a living, but from then on I was quite passionate about writing.
And I'm interested to know, at what stage did you kind of define yourself as a horror writer, or was it something that you found your books were categorised as?
Yeah, I think so. Virtually everything I've ever written, almost everything has been speculative fiction. So writing with a fantastic element. There's very little I've written that can't be categorized like that. I mean, the one thing, I wrote a thriller called The Hunt, which is here, heavily based on my love of endurance sport. That's one of 2 novels I've written out of 45 that don't include speculative elements. And it's not something I forced, and it's not something that I consciously thought about. My mum had a great saying that came from my grandmother, which was, it's the way your mum put your hat on. And my mum put my hat on as a horror writer, and I don't know why that is, really. I tend to go for the darker side of things in my fiction. I think I'm quite sort of light-hearted and easygoing as a person, but I do wonder what I'd be like if I didn't write horror. That's probably not worth thinking about. I get it out in my fiction. So to be defined as a horror writer is always something that I've never steered away from. And if anyone asks me what I write, I say I'm a horror writer. Although I also write thrillers and fantasy. And the other thing about horror is there's a famous saying there's an American writer and editor called Douglas Winter. He said horror is not a genre, it's an emotion. So you can have horror fiction in any genre, really. I could have historical naval romance horror story that I've never written, actually. I should make a note of that. But horror can bleed into any sort of, I've written horror westerns, horror thrillers. So horror as a genre has always been a bit confused to me because it spans all genres, really.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, in terms of your readership, do you feel that the categorization could limit you in any way, that there might be people who are put off the idea because of the genre, whereas actually if they delve into the books, as I have, find them just amazing stories about people, actually?
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways to look at it. I don't feel limited by being called a horror writer because I write what I want to write. And it's not often I sit down and think, right, I've got to write another horror novel now. I'll sit down and write a novel. And generally it's the publisher who then does the categorizing. So it's the publisher who'll see, I work for horror publishers, but if I just write a novel on spec in general, like Eden, which is another novel I wrote on spec, it came out pretty much as a horror novel. So the categorization is done mainly by the publishers and the booksellers more than anything. Waterstones need to know what shelf to put my book on. I've never seen my fiction in cookery, for instance, but I have seen it in general fiction and crime, which I'm fine with that. As for people, I've lost count of the number of times I've met somebody at a party or at a friend's house and they've asked me what I write. And I say, I'm a horror writer. And they're, I don't read horror. And then I say, well, have you read Stephen King? Oh yeah, I love Stephen King. Right, he's a horror writer. Really? And people can have preconceived notions of what a horror novel entails. And like you say, most of my fiction is about people first and foremost. Vampires aren't scary, but people's reactions to vampires are scary. So I don't feel constrained by it, but just occasionally I can get a little bit frustrated by some people's reactions. But then that's people who've never think they've picked up a horror book. And you delve into their reading history and actually they do read horror. Maybe they think there's a stigma attached to saying that they like it, which is a bit depressing, but that's people.
And when did you make the decision to become a full-time writer?
Right, so I became a full-time writer 15 years ago, the end of next month. So it's a good anniversary coming up for me. The decision, I've been working towards it since, so my first novel was published in 1997, which again is aging me. So from then on, my ambition was to become a full-time writer. And I worked at local government, as did lots of horror writers, which says quite a bit, I think. Well, lots of horror writers I know used to be local government employees. And I went part-time, first of all, for 3 or 4 years. So I was working 2.5 days a week at County Hall and then going home for 2.5 days a week to write. And then it was 15 years ago that I constructed a really canny graph showing my income from writing and the time when I should give up work to give it a go. Showed it to my wife and she said, yep, go for it. So, and that worked out okay, actually. So 15 years I've been full-time, which is quite shocking. It's almost as long as I was working, actually. I worked for 20 years from the age of 18 and then full-time writer since then, yeah.
It sounds like from what you said, you've got a really good balance as well, because you've got passionate about the outdoor activities and the writing. I can imagine if you didn't have that, writing from home full-time could be more challenging. Is that part of the sort of the reason that you love to be outdoors and active so much?
Yeah, it really. So I've only been doing that for about 10 years, actually. I'm very passionate about talking about exercise and what it gives you and the benefits. 10 years ago, I was a couple of stone heavier and unfit, and I sort of hit a moment in life, 41, and I thought I might as well give in now. I'll have another pint. And it was January the 1st, and we walked up the local pub, the Goose and Cuckoo, and I found it really hard to get there. And it was soon after that I bumped into a friend who, and he was transformed, and I hadn't seen him for only 6 months. And I said, what happened to you? And he said, I got fit. So I said, blimey, that's for me. And so we committed to doing the 3 Peaks Challenge together with a couple of other friends. And from that moment on, I found a love of outdoor fitness and running, and that moved on to biking, that moved on to triathlon. And it's become a real passion. And I found something that I'm really excited about and passionate about, which is triathlon. And it's almost the side benefit is getting fitter. So I don't do it to get fit. I do it because I really enjoy it. I enjoy running in the hills, and I enjoy cycling. And the side benefit is getting a bit fitter. And as it applies to writing, people often ask, "Oh, you must turn over lots of plot points when you're out cycling and running," but I very rarely do, actually. I don't listen to music. I enjoy the sound, enjoy just being on my own in nature. And it blows cobwebs away, and it makes me feel ready to get back to work and to start work. And I think subconsciously I probably do turn over plot ideas and story ideas, but it's not something that I focus on. So I'd recommend, and also I sit behind a desk working, and sometimes I'll be sitting down 6 or 7 hours a day. So after that, I really don't want to go and sit and watch TV for 4 or 5 hours. I'll go out and enjoy myself in the outdoors.
Tim, I'm curious to know a bit more about the process of when one of your books is turned into a film or screenplay, how that works and what the experience has been like for you.
So virtually every experience is different. Every process I've found is completely different. So I've had several options. Well, quite a few of my projects have been optioned. And I've had 2 made into films. Both experiences, polar opposites almost. The Pay the Ghost, the Nicolas Cage film, I wasn't involved in the slightest. I saw the first script that was developed by an independent producer in New York. And from then on, I wasn't involved in the film. I didn't get to go to set. I actually found out it was being filmed in Toronto because I did a bit of ego Googling Nicolas Cage, Pay the Ghost, and I came up with some photos on the street in Toronto, and the film was shooting, so blimey, yeah, that's good. But The Silence was a totally opposite process. I've got a manager in LA, he sort of packaged the film and set it up with a really great producer, Alexandra Milchan. And I went to a great film company, Constantine, in Germany, that made all the Resident Evil films. And they involved me right from the beginning. And the director was fantastic, John Leonetti. He's a super guy, and we've become really close friends. And I was not officially involved in the scripting process. In fact, the guys, the Van Dyke brothers, wrote the script, so they're Dick Van Dyke's grandsons. So that was an interesting link as well, although there was no dancing in The Silence. But I was involved unofficially with the film in some of the screenwriting processes. If they hit a problem, the director would talk to me, and I'd sort of help out. And I got to go to set as well in Toronto, again in Toronto. It's a great big centre for filming in North America. I went to set for 2 days. I was in the movie as a corpse, all good fun. So utterly wonderful process. I've been told, from getting the option on The Silence to the film being made was less than 2 years, which is just phenomenally fast. I've been told by friends in the know that I was lucky enough to have almost the perfect film experience. And the film turned out great, and it turned up on Netflix. It's still there now, and I love the film. I got to meet Stanley Tucci and Kiernan Shipka, who were wonderful. And as you can tell from my reaction, it was just a dream experience, really. Any writer wants to see their story filmed. I've been lucky enough to have 2 filmed, and one of them was a superb experience. And the other one was great as well, Pay the Ghost. We're very close to Halloween now. Pay the Ghost will indefinitely be on TV over Halloween or the Horror Channel or one of the streaming channels, because it's a Halloween film. It always pops up. But I wasn't in that one.
Thanks, Tim. I'd like to hear a little bit about your latest novel. I think it was launched during lockdown, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was an interesting experience. Yeah, Eden, yes. Launched during lockdown. Well, I'll tell you about the novel first and then talk about the process of having a book launched during lockdown. So the novel's it's a my publishers pitched it as an eco thriller. It's got horror elements. Again, it's a combination of passions of mine. So there's an element of endurance sport to the novel. It's a chase novel, really. But then it also talks about climate change and the climate crisis. And it's set in a near future where we've reached the tipping point, and we're over the tipping point, and the climate's gone to hell. But the countries of Earth have come together to try and save the planet. So they've set up massive areas of the Earth called virgin zones, which we've given back to nature. We've withdrawn from as humans completely, pulled out of these areas. They're not national parks, they're not scientific experiments, they're just areas of the planet that we've given back to nature. And this is something that a lot of people are talking about at the moment. There's I think it's called the Half Earth Project, which is basically saying we need to give half the Earth back to nature to become the lungs of the planet. So in my novel, that happens. Eden is the oldest and the largest of these areas. And it's somewhere that adventure racers and endurance sportsmen see as a challenge. So a bit naughty of them, but there's a team of adventure racers who decide they want to be the first team to cross Eden. So it's very difficult to get in because it's protected and guarded. But when they do get in, they discover that nature has re-established itself in sort of malevolent ways in Eden, and humankind is no longer wanted in there, and stuff goes down, which I won't give any spoilers away, but it's a good action adventure novel, I think. As for having it launched in lockdown, it was not ideal, to be honest. It was going to be my first book tour for Eden around the UK, and actually right at this moment now I should have been on tour in Germany signing for the German edition. But my publisher, I've done a lot of online stuff, a lot of interviews online, Zooms, and pushed it as hard as we can. And I'm dabbling with trying to adapt it for TV at the moment, but that's very early days. So reaction is great to the book. It's just at the time it came out, you couldn't walk into a shop and buy it, unfortunately. But you still can now. I notice it's actually on the table in Waterstones now, which is unusual for a book so long after publication. So people are still pushing it.
That's great. Well, we wish you all the luck in the world with that.
Yeah, thanks.
And
thank you.
Hopefully this will help to spread the word somewhat.
Yeah,
and
hope so,
I look forward to reading it.
Yeah,
and thank you so much for your time.
Yes, pleasure.
And
Thanks
really,
for having me. It's
really
been really
interesting.
good.
Thank you so much.
Thanks very much. Cheers.
All right. Thank you. That was